We are live. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to our Learning Circles Roundtable, which I hope will be the first of several, in which we will be discussing the project which we have been running concurrently at Chicago Public Library with our partners there, and in Ljubljana, Slovenia, discussing how things have gone in learning circles. So, to give everyone a little bit of a background as to what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to start with brief introductions of everyone on the team. Hi, Catherine. And then we'll go into a little bit more detail into what the projects have been and exactly what a learning circle is. After we've done that, I'm going to focus in a little bit more on the two iterations of circles that we've had running in Chicago and in Ljubljana. And then we'll get some insights on what happened in those circles, and hopefully we'll have some time to talk about what's coming next and take some answers from our audience of thousands. Because, you know, obviously we're all just incredibly famous on the internet right now. So let's start with introductions, going from left to right across the bottom of my screen. Erica, would you like to introduce yourself? And
Hi.
as a warm-up question, I would like you, once you have introduced yourself, to tell us what your favorite library is and where.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm a developer here at PDPU, a software developer, but I'm also how did she call it? Learning circles facilitator extraordinaire. And my favorite library, obviously, it has to be Chicago Public Library, right? I've never been there, but you know, it's on my bucket list.
Awesome. Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a cyber navigator at the Chicago Public Libraries. And while I really love the Chicago Public Libraries, I think my favorite libraries have been the ones my mother has run and I grew up in as a kid, and they were these small, intimate theological libraries.
Amazing. Grif.
My name is Grif. I'm the learning lead here at Peer-to-Peer University. My favorite library is the SOAS library in central London, right near where Becca just had a really horrible cab ride. I would say there's the Hare Krishnas who give free food outside of it. It's where I wrote a lot of my undergraduate thesis, and I just loved sitting at those tables that make you look out the window so you can't get distracted.
Very important in a library to not be distracted. Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I am a researcher at the MIT Media Lab, and we're working with P2PU on this project. And so I've been helping to do some of the research related to it, some of the design, and I guess my favorite library would be also the library that I grew up at, which is the Oak Brook Public Library in the western suburbs of Chicago. And I just like it because it's where I fell in love with reading and learning and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm Becca. I'm going to be facilitating today's call. Snap to you, Emily, as the child of librarians. Did your mother try and Dewey Decimalize your bookshelves when you were a kid? Because mine certainly did. And my favorite library is a place called the London Library, which is in central London as well. It's on St. James's Square, and it's 4 Georgian townhouses that have been knocked together to build a library that is just full of shelves and mystery. So now that we've set an appropriately spooky and nostalgic tone, it would be great to move into the first stage of questions, which is an introduction to the project. I would like to start with you, Grif. If you could just give us a little bit of an overview into what exactly the project is that we have been working with Chicago Public Libraries on, and then we can get into some of the specifics of the learning circles.
Sure. So I think last year, the Night News Challenge started with the question, how can we leverage libraries as a platform to build more knowledgeable communities? And in response to that charge, P2PU and Chicago Public Library put forth an application to try to create a model for facilitating study groups around online courses in libraries. And I think the interest from both CPL and P2PU was recognizing that there's a ton of pretty good free online learning material. There's a lot of kind of physical spaces around cities. And there is existing networks of communities that would probably be interested in coming together around some of these materials if we just had a way of kind of putting all of those pieces together. P2PU has always been very geared towards peer learning and learning as a social activity. And so I think this was kind of an exciting new avenue for P2P to explore with kind of a very physical brick and mortar partner to see how we might leverage these online resources in a physical space.
And then that takes me to you, Emily, because you have been part of our project there. If you could just explain a little bit about your role in terms of the Night Project and the learning circles.
Sure. Well, as I said earlier, I'm a cyber navigator through CPL, and that is someone who works directly with the public regarding technology, anything that has to do with the internet. And P2PU approached me because I had that direct connection with the library and patrons already. As such, my role has kind of been on the ground, working within these learning circles with participants, learners, people who have expressed a desire to have an alternative space to take on a challenge and learn a new skill set. And so my role has kind of been as a facilitator, someone who helps guide these learners through these various courses and study groups. I've kind of, initially I had to introduce the idea and develop some sort of, as we were calling them, norms for the participants to feel there was some sort of incentive for coming back each week and some sort of ease and comfortableness with how the course would sort of play out. But as the weeks have gone by, I have taken more of a backseat and allowed the participants to kind of self-guide and to develop their own systems and ways for kind of problem solving and I guess gearing the course how they want it to go, so that almost my role could potentially become obsolete and it could just be peer guided.
Well, why we would never want you to be obsolete.
Well, in this case,
yeah.
Can I just quickly jump in just by means of orienting, and I probably should have said more of this in the introduction, but just that, kind of the learning circles that we've developed with Chicago Public Library have led to, 4, 6, or 7 week long courses that have run this spring, and that's been in public speaking, which uses materials from Coursera, Gentle Introduction to Python, which is a P2PU and MIT OpenCourseWare course, GED Prep Math, which is Khan Academy materials, which is what Katherine and the folks at MIT are working with, and then an academic writing course with FutureLearn. So Emily's role has really been to help groups of peer learners that have been meeting in the library once a week to go through those materials.
Yeah, thanks for that, Grif. And in fact, Katherine, in a minute I'm going to be asking you about the research and how it ties into that. But to leap quickly to Ljubljana, across the Atlantic, Erica, could you just give a little bit of background as to your particular set of participants in the circle that you've been running in Ljubljana?
Well, in addition to this project that we are just talking about, we are just we ran a different project, and that is something that Grif just mentioned. We ran a course, a gentle introduction to Python, and because we had this project, we thought it might be really great to just put them together So we decided to do a learning circle here in Ljubljana. And as I am in my afternoon activities a co-facilitator of coding group for women here in Ljubljana, we thought that would be the perfect place to actually start a learning circle about Python. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to do the same as Emily, and only in Ljubljana, but only for Python.
Right. So considering that we've got this range of topics and a range of communities that we're working with, Katherine, what have been some of the questions or hypotheses that you've been interested in finding out about within the circles?
Yeah, so I think that one of the most basic things that we want to understand better, sort of answer, is how can we create an experience that is mostly peer-based around these open materials. That is something that people can actually, benefit from and take away, like learning from and succeed more than they would on their own. And so I think that we hypothesize that just sort of curating these spaces where people can come together and learn, and also sort of on top of that, sort of scaffolding more types of things, what we usually call like deeper learning things. So goal setting and building up self-efficacy and self-confidence in learning and things like that. We're really interested in sort of figuring out how we can do that in a way that really leverages really leverages the peers in the group, helping each other to build these skills. I think that it's really interesting to sort of see what people can do on their own, and in this first round, I think we're trying to learn mostly like what we need to do in order to basically just let them succeed.
So that leads quite beautifully onto my next question, actually, which is to actually talk about the groups themselves, because I think for those of us involved in online learning, there's often this sort of somewhat nebulous idea of the community, and they are just faces at the other end of computer screens, and we're not actually sure what it is that happens. And so to Emily and then to Erica, what I'm interested in finding out about is what actually happened in the circles, not so much as a kind of day-to-day activity, but what you saw people doing as they worked through the materials. How did people engage with the content as a group, as opposed to on their own? Emily?
Sure. Well, for most of my groups, which Grif sort of gave an overview of what they were, the first session, maybe even two, was a bit rocky in the sense that people were initially getting used to the idea of what these learning circles were about. But as they progressed, I noted people started really embracing the concepts, and we developed a couple of different ways for the group to interact. I mean, besides having sort of a beginning and an ending together, we had overhead projectors, and people would come up to them and sort of eradicate or instruct some of their confusion or concerns, and the group would kind of rally around it and have solutions for the entire group to kind of learn together. That was really lovely. People definitely sat near each other, and in these groups I noticed there was often group leaders that would sort of form, and they were probably the people who were a little more concise and well-spoken and could address everybody kind of at their own level, because that, as a public library, people come with all different skill sets and sort of learning styles. I also started noticing people develop close bonds and relationships and would stay after the learning circle was over and talk together, not even about the courses per se. And people developed email chains and other methods of communication. And as a few of these courses have wrapped up, folks have kind of made game plans of how they were going to continue these learning circles beyond P2PU and me. And I think that kind of stands like as a testament for the success of these learning circles.
And I think it also says something about how the value of learning with a group can kind of trump any materials, right? Like people are always going to be a great resource as opposed to words on a screen. But Erica, I'm interested in your group because you were running a course that had particular requirements in terms of a degree of technical ability or technical skill. Like this was a coding course, and coding courses are very popular for online learning, but often the barrier to them is a little higher than in some other courses. So I'd be interested to hear what happened in your group.
Yeah, like Emily said, that in the beginning, our group was actually was built from 8 women, and that was like not because we didn't want any other gender, but because our group. I mean, the coding club that we were we were meeting at was mainly for women, so that's why only women applied. And we started out with 8 people because I thought that it would be best if we just have small groups, although we had a lot of applications. And what happened was that I had to go through application and see who would be best fit. Which is often not a very good way of. I don't have any way of telling who is actually the best fit for learning circle. So I did then at the end I did choose 8 people that were there first. So the first 8 applications, and I invited everybody else to be able to organize their own study group. And at the beginning, what happened was that at the beginning was the people came in and expected a lecture from me. So some people weren't very good with the fact that they were not getting a lecture, that I wasn't writing on the whiteboard, and explaining stuff in a sense of workshop, and they were not really satisfied with that. So what was my big obstacle here actually was the fact that I'm an expert on the topic, and that's something that I guess at the end I would probably advise against for the future of learning circles, just because it seems that people are first off more closed to the possibility of them being able to help other people if there is an expert in the room, because they get more shy and they don't want to get judged. So yeah, at the end I think it would be best if learning circles would be facilitated by people who weren't an expert on the topics. But we finished. Well, we were not finished completely yet, but we're left with 3 people, and those 3 people are really helping each other. And all the stuff that we really wanted to get at the end, all of them. So it was good. I think, and I just want to say, sorry, Becca. I don't think starting with 8 and ending with 3 is a failure, actually.
No, I agree with you. It isn't. And we'll talk more about that later. But Emily, the question that Erica raised about being a content expert and her opinion that you don't need to be an expert to run a learning circle, I'd like to get your take on that, because you ran circles which had a broad range of different topics. And as far as I know, you're not an expert on any of them, although you might have secret skills that we don't know about.
That's true. I went to school for art, and it was not, that's not what the classes were. Um, well, I think initially, so as I said, it was a little rocky. I think initially people were confused why I wasn't an expert and why I would be there if I hadn't gotten a degree within those topics. So I think people were like searching for that content expert. But I agree with Eric. I think it's good that I wasn't, because then they stopped looking in my general direction for content, maybe help. I was there to um, help kind of the flow of the group and technology troubleshooting and logistics. But instead, people, yeah, they started. I mean, I would suggest ways of arriving at an answer, and I think with that, people started looking for how they could find the answers on their own and weren't inhibited or shy about it. So I agree. I think, at least in my experience, I mean, I'm not a content expert on any of these, so I don't know what my experience would have been, but I think having heard her opinion and then my experience, it would probably be best not to have someone who's an expert, or if they are, don't allude to it.
Keep your skills under wraps.
Right.
We have a question. We have a question that's coming through from some of the people who are watching, and I'm going to address it to you, Grif. The question is how participants are finding out about the learning circles. And that actually, I think, speaks to a wider question about how we have selected the community that we have chosen to engage with at CPL, and how we're connecting with those. So I was wondering, or how we're connecting with them. So I was wondering if you could just give a little bit of background on how we found people or recruited people.
Yeah, just to make sure I answer the question, I will answer it succinctly in one sentence first. We relied primarily on Chicago Public Library to do marketing within their existing communities, and that largely took the form of flyers in the library and in the kind of physically proximate extended community, email lists that go out from libraries, and even just kind of intercom announcements that were happening in the hours and day leading up to it. We were working with Harold Washington Library, which is the central library in Chicago, which takes up an entire city block and has very fancy owls on the roof. And then we're working with the Edgewater Branch Library, which is a much smaller neighborhood library in northern Chicago. So there were some differences also in terms of what we were able, how engaging we could be with the community. It felt like in Edgewater, there's a great sense of people knowing that this was going on, and in Harold Washington, it's such a big institution, there's so much happening. We had to be a bit, it was a bit, we found that kind of marketing in those two places was a bit different. But I would just say more generally in terms of why we decided to do this, to go this way, there have certainly been physical communities that have sprung up around online courses before. I think Meetup even had a lot of people have been using Meetup for edX and Coursera courses. Some other libraries have even coordinated before. But as far as I know, and I would love for anyone to give an example to the contrary, but a lot of this has kind of taken for granted that someone's interested in an online course, has already signed up for an online course, and then has kind of gone through and either started a discussion topic or kind of scraped information and found IP addresses to figure out who was in a certain city, and then got in touch with people who'd already signed up. This is something we did with creative learning last year also. And what we decided to do this year was the opposite, which was rather than taking interest in the online course for granted and then trying to drum up support for being part of a physical group, we took the physical group for granted and then tried to drum up support for taking part in an online course. And we felt that people are already using the library. Both the Knight grant that we're working on and the Joyce Foundation grant that MIT is working on, have they're not identical, but they both are looking towards adult learners who are either working towards a high school equivalency or maybe college ready, looking to improve job skills. And so from that end, we felt like we were going to find a lot of those eligible participants in and around the library's network, rather than folks who are, rather than in the kind of bowels of an edX course or something. And I think we have found that more or less. I think the 10 or so learners that started in each of the courses, and the 3 to 6 learners who remain 7 weeks later. For many of them, this was the first time they've taken an online course, but the library was already a familiar place for them. So I think we'll certainly be going forward with that. We'll certainly be trying to do some more marketing, making some more, kind of connections in and around Chicago. I think the library CPL has been great in terms of offering us the physical space. We're looking into a number of ways that we might ultimately involve different facilitators. But I think the general kind of hypothesis that we entered with was like start with the library and drum up support and courses from there. I think that's something we'll definitely continue with in the round 2 that will start in September.
Thanks, Grif. And I think I'm going to jump in and add that certainly for PTPU, this has been a fascinating change in terms of the audience that we imagined that we would be working with. In the past, we've run massive online courses with thousands of participants, but they've always been for a particularly tech-comfortable group of people for whom learning online is entertainment and a degree of not a luxury, that's too strong a word, but something that you do for pleasure in your spare time. There isn't necessarily the impetus to gain life skills or skills that will help you progress perhaps into finding jobs in the same way that we have found with the community that we've been working with at CPL. And so that, I think, has also made us rethink some of the ways that we implement our ground game, for want of a better way of putting it, and something that we're going to continue to iterate upon as we go along. So what I'm going to ask Emily and Erica about now is a little bit about the expectations of your participants. Erica, when you started with your circle, did people come in knowing what they were in for, or did you have to, was that part of the process, was managing people's expectations of what the course would be?
Yes, the thing is that, because of the topic, programming is very in to be learning right now. There was expectations of this is going to be really simple, and because the whole thing was presented as 6 weeks course, people thought that in the first week they're already going to be able to write their, what kind of a program, sophisticated program and stuff like that. But at the end, we ended up in the beginning learning about how to install stuff on the computer and stuff like that. So in that terms, definitely there was a letdown of sorts for people. But and also, like I said, the problem was that the traditional way of education, and in my country that's particularly strong, and I'm not exactly sure of the reason, but people really do expect that they're going to learn if somebody is going to be teaching them. So whiteboards and stuff like that. So they were expecting that, and at one point I did feel like really bad inside, because I saw that people's faces when I said, look, there's not going to be a whiteboard, although there was a whiteboard in the room. There's not going to be any whiteboard. What you're going to do actually is you're going to take this course online, but you're going to have to do it together. So you're going to have to rely on each other to help. And I'm only here because if something goes completely wrong and wonky, that I help you with that. I'm very able to help you, but I don't want to. And that was something that wasn't really expectation, managing of these expectations was hard for me, and it was hard for them to understand as well at the beginning. But the beauty of this kind of learning is that people really embrace it really fast. You can see the logic behind this really fast, and when that was out in the open, everything was okay, and people regrouped and said, okay, yeah, let's do this. We want to be a part of this too, So yeah.
And how about in Chicago, Emily? Did you find that people came with expectations, and were they met?
Yeah, there were two different kinds of people. There were people who had arrived and attended our info session nights, and people who just showed up for the study groups on the first day. So the people who had actually attended the info session nights were totally prepared. They knew what they were getting into, and they were on board. And it was so smooth, and I appreciated that. But I think the majority of the learners hadn't attended the info session nights in several of the classes, so I kind of had to do a mini info session at the beginning, which, yeah, there were some people initially who, right off the bat, that was just like they were done. They weren't gonna attend another one, because, as Erica was saying, I think they expected a lecturer of some sort, which doesn't even fit with my personality at all. So that wouldn't be good. But the folks who continued on with it past the first day seemed to really get in the groove of it. I used a lot of things such as we and us. I made them feel kind of equals with me, because essentially we were. I didn't really know half of the things that they were learning. And I'm talking specifically Python. I sat with them. I got to know them as like individuals and wanted to know about their lives. And I think when that started to happen, they didn't look at me as a teacher, and they saw me as close to a peer. Not exactly, but yeah. Yeah, there was some managing of expectations initially, but I think that kind of wore off really fast from how I treated them. Yeah.
The bold approach, I think. Really.
Yeah.
Katherine, I need to ask you a question about maybe a slightly meta question, but in this somewhat unconventional learning environment, we all know about learning in libraries, but for people who have expectations of kind of traditional education and the very plotted out route that traditional education takes, how does one think about success in these kinds of contexts? How do we know if people have learnt stuff, and if that leveraging of the peer group that you mentioned earlier on has really worked in this kind of a learning environment?
Yeah, so I think that this first round, one thing that we learned was that 6 weeks is a kind of a short period of time, especially when you have to deal with the sorts of things that Erica and Emily were both talking about, like getting people on board with the model, making them feel comfortable with not having there being, a teacher who's transmitting information to them, which is a way that people are most familiar with learning. So I think that with that in mind, I think that a lot of the things that are going to be learned in these types of situations are going to be a little bit of like content-based knowledge, which I think is pretty easy to see it, to test for and see if people have learned. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of learning that is not as easy to measure. Probably like what people call building up of like non-cognitive skills. So I think that there's a lot that people will learn in terms of like being able to collaborate with peers. A lot, sort of alluding to what Emily was saying, a lot of just like empowering people to understand that they have everything they need to go out and find the answers to the questions that they're having, so that it's not so that their first reaction isn't just like, oh, where's the teacher, where's the person who has all the answers, can they tell me what I'm doing wrong, and instead learning that their first reaction should be, okay, I have a question and I know all of these resources that I have available to me, how do I find the answer? And I think that those types of skills are much harder to measure in situations like this, but I do think that those are the types of things that we're trying to sort of cultivate in this experience.
So bearing that in mind, to you, Grif, how does one design a learning circle to, and I'm talking about the structure here, like the scaffolding around the circle. How do you design to leverage these types of non-metricable skills?
I will start. I will answer an easier question than the one you just asked to start, which is measuring the slightly more metricable skills. I think Katherine and Emily had an interesting relationship with the GED course, in which Khan Academy has a really, correct me if I'm wrong, both of you, but I think a pretty good kind of coaching platform that allowed Katherine to kind of be involved asynchronously to see what people were working on, where they're getting stuck, and was able to kind of make recommendations and prompt learners. So it wasn't just kind of the blind leading the blind in a complete sense. But what we were able to do was get a sense of checking in with the learners, but in a way where they were still driving what happened during on the day-to-day, and they were developing a kind of a group in which they were holding themselves accountable to achieving the goals that they had set for themselves, which were kind of informed by Katherine and Emily's input. So I felt like that was important to mention. I think just the structure that we've kind of developed, which kind of starts each course starting with just kind of a brief kind of stand-up of what people's goals are for the day and what they're seeking to achieve, and then going over anything that didn't work well the prior week, and then ending the course with kind of a quick reflection, and then kind of setting forward anything that they want to change the next week. We've been doing all of this kind of learning as we've been doing it this first time, but I think we're hoping that we might be able to either through kind of facilitation guides that we're mocking up, or through some of the kind of software interventions that we're developing, better kind of monitor and kind of engage with how people are achieving their goals, how they're setting their goals, if the changes that people want to make at the end of a course are actually reflected in what happens the following week. And I think that if we see people showing up week after week, and actively kind of engaging in creating this process for themselves, or creating, being part of kind of building the culture in the learning circle, I think that does demonstrate a lot of the the deeper learning principles that Katherine mentioned earlier. And I would also add that a lot of online courses right now, and measuring online courses with based on retention isn't necessarily a good metric, but it is quite low, less than 5%. And I think the fact that after 6 or 7 weeks we're seeing close to 50% retention in these courses of getting through an online course does indicate that something's working, and I think it is more than just the delivery of content and learning the skills, but part of that kind of peer learning environment that has kept people coming back week after week.
So that, yet again, we have a perfect kind of segue from one question to another, because the questions are coming in thick and fast from our audience of millions. And there's a question about what we think might happen if there were no facilitators in a course, and possibly, maybe not right from the beginning, but if perhaps from weeks 3 to 5 or 2 to 5, if a facilitator were to disappear. And I think I'm actually going to put you on the spot with this one, Grif, because I feel like I can't ask facilitators to talk about their non-existence. That's just like too existential for a Friday afternoon. So in your expert opinion, what do you think might happen?
For them to talk about it, but it's definitely something else for me to talk about it. I don't know. I kind of do want to hear I want to hear Emily talk about her own insignificance in the universe related to her role in learning circles, and I'm happy to chime in after that. But I think this is what the three of us were going to talk about normally today, if this was just our weekly scheduled call. So I'd actually would love to hear Emily and Erica chime in on that first.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
No, that's totally fine. Sorry, Emily. You're on the spot with this one. What would happen if you disappeared in a puff of smoke halfway through the course?
Um, well, I think theoretically, if it was just if we if we were just focusing on the peers, I think it probably could function very well. I think that at that point there would be a group leader kind of established or several. I do think someone like that needs to sort of step up because people have busy lives, they, forget things, and someone who's kind of motivational like that, that's important. But at about 4 to 5 weeks, that's already been established. They have a routine, they have a rapport, and they have been kind of relying on each other and feeling as if they have a responsibility towards not only their own learning but their peers. But in the context of CPL, the Chicago Public Libraries, it's kind of a different, I guess, bag altogether in terms of I've talked with librarians and they are at this point very unsure if they would have the time to manage these learners within their space on their own. So I think that's something we have to investigate a little bit more. I do think it's possible, but we need to have some confidence to reassure the library staff.
And what about you, Erica? What would have happened if you disappeared halfway through your circles?
If I would disappear halfway through, then that would be okay, and I think everybody would be A-okay. It's saying that I think if I would not be there to begin with, this group would, I'm positive it would disintegrate into nothing.
Yeah.
So the thing is that what this kind of group needs is actually a beginner motor where you are the one who is responsible for, just sending out emails as to is everybody coming? Is there any problems? Do you have any problems? And also, how do you feel? Are you sick? Are you, I don't know, hungry or whatnot?
Yeah.
So you have to take care of all of that stuff until people feel comfortable with each other. And whilst they're learning from each other and you're pushing them to do that, actually that happens really fast. So that's why I said that if I would disappear in the middle of the course, that would be probably just fine. But at the beginning, I think it would not go very smoothly at all.
No.
Just because people sometimes don't have the real motivation behind what they would learn from an online course, and until they do find that, I think that's having a facilitator there is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you guys haven't worked yourselves out of a job yet.
No, not yet.
You have not ensured your own obsolescence. That makes me feel much better. Another question that's come through is about the techniques that you use during the circle to help participants realize that they can find the answers themselves and learn from their peers, because there actually is a knack to that kind of stuff. You worked with a bunch of groups, Emily, across a broad range of topics. So how did you encourage people to be independent in their learning?
Well, let's see. At the beginning of our study groups each week, we would have sort of a coming together where we would talk about sort of problems we encountered, especially with homework, if people worked outside of class, where people were at, if other people had similar problems, if not, what were their solutions. So we definitely had a moment where we were in a circle while we were doing this. So we were all kind of, viewing each other, listening, having a space to do that in. Generally from there, we would go to the overhead projector, which was hooked up to laptops, so we could visually show solutions. I used language like, well, Paul, did this, and he was able to find it. Paul, how would you instruct Hugh to do this? And then I would, in that way, bring these two people together and step back. I also, luckily, had some really supportive library staff, and they provided handouts and sometimes came in to speak about resources beyond just the online. There was, a whole host of books and materials that people could look up, check out. We also have a really great resource on CPL called BrainFuse. There's online tutors and various interactive networks in terms of the various different study groups we had, depending on what we used. There was sometimes Coursera or Khan Academy. There's on some of them, they have their own online communities where you could post questions or work that you have done, and so I made sure that the learners were very much aware of how these online platforms worked and functioned so that they could use it to the fullest, and kind of not only have their physical peers, but this whole broad online community who were kind of in the same boat as them.
And you, Eric, did you have any sneaky tricks in your back pocket?
Well, I did a lot of what Emily just said. So I made it my business in the beginning to actually learn about people that are in the group. Not only their names, but what is their background as well. And doing that, sometimes I really felt like this nagging person who is just going from person to person and asking them all sorts of stuff. And sometimes you could see that they were a little bit uncomfortable. But, at the end, then in probably week 2, towards the end of the session, that exactly what Emily said started to happening when I saw a person having an issue, when I said, okay, now this person is already over that and she could help you. As soon as this one time this happened and everybody saw that this is happening, they were all just relaxed, and then they didn't have any more problems with helping each other. It is something that I think one needs to be mindful of, is that the group leaders, as Emily called them, sometimes they can be just a little bit too leadery.
Yeah.
And you have to then make them understand that not make them understand, but make it others understand that they can also be like that, that they can also, they don't need to just like just to listen to that person, they can also be the one who gives advice as well. So I think that probably the most important thing is to get to know a person, so by their name, by their motivation, and then just try to find the same level and try to couple them for the session. And do a lot of that. So you have to, I can't emphasize, sorry Becca, this was the 3rd time I interrupted you. I think I owe you an ice cream at least. But I can't emphasize, there was so much of me pushing them together. I did that constantly, every 20 minutes I said, because somebody was asking, and what do I do with that? Just ask her, she was doing that, just ask her. So a lot of that, you can't be really you can't get irritated by that, because that's a lot of that you're going to be doing.
So interestingly, just hearing the two of you speak, it makes me realize that in fact you were mirroring a lot of the skills that we hope that the circles would teach people. We want people to learn to be independent, we want people to feel confident to look for answers themselves. And actually, I think a lot of the facilitator's role was mirroring precisely that behavior for everyone in the group, which is kind of interesting. We've got 10 minutes left. There's one more question that's come through, and then once we've answered that, I'm going to ask you guys about successes. So think about that in the meantime. But Grif and Katherine, this is again a kind of meta question. One of the questions has been asked, which is, are there any reports of people having tried online learning alone and finding it easier or better done this way? Or do most people, I think this question is referring specifically to the circles though. So maybe it's a shorter answer, Erica and Emily, in fact, rather than Grif and Katherine. Did any of the people who participated in your circles have experience of doing online courses on their own beforehand?
Yes, there were some people who had done online courses before. They told me that it was challenging for them, and so those people, that is one of their motivating reasons why they joined the Learning Circle, was to find that motivation that they were not able to seek like on their own.
And Erica?
In my group, I actually had people who were already participating, not only in the online courses, but events like Jungle Girls and stuff like that. And they still were finding this very hard because there's just information blurbed at you. But here they found a space where they can actually go through all of the problems before the learning happened. So, saying that they're not good enough, or other people are smarter and stuff like that, and they went through all of that process, and then learning started to happen, and then you could actually saw that people are really appreciating the fact that they're learning with other people face to face as opposed to online course.
Cool. Thank you.
I think I think the meta question that we thought was asked is also worth quickly addressing, which is that, I definitely think for some people doing this online on their own is a better experience for them, and I think that's and those are the people who those are our enemies. No, I think those are it's great. And I think this isn't for everyone. It's not the solution for what online learning needs to become for it to really kind of make an impact in a lot of people's lives, because I think it already is making an impact in a lot of people's lives. But I think we have found, and this goes back to Emily's earlier point about all the resources that exist at Chicago Public Library, there just does seem to be a fair divide between a large portion of the population and gaining access to online learning materials, which is still a really intimidating barrier for a lot of people. And I think and so I think that what a learning circle can offer is just a place to become more familiar and more comfortable with kind of utilizing the internet as a resource for learning. And I think libraries in particular, Chicago Public Library has demonstrated that they're extraordinarily equipped and willing and excited to kind of help be there as a support. And I think it would be a great success if someone took part in a few learning circles and then went off and was doing courses on their own. So by no means do we think this is the only way that online learning should work. I certainly think it's a more fun way, but that's also just me.
And one more question for you, Emily. You're super famous today. Everyone wants to know. But to Emily and Erica, there's a question about how much study people did outside of the learning circle, and whether it became a reason not to work on the material on their own. And I know in one of your circles, Emily, I think it was the academic writing course, people did a lot of work on their own and worked ahead, didn't they?
Yeah. It did depend on the courses, but also the student. Academic writing, I would say 90% of the people did a lot of work outside of class, but the reason why they were motivated to do a lot of work outside of class was so that when we came together, we would have material to sort of talk about as a group, share, give feedback on, and a way for them to really get the most benefit from their peers, which wasn't sitting in front of the computer. Similarly, in the public speaking class, that is what the students eventually chose to do. They found it a hindrance to just listen to the videos or watch in class. For a lot of them, it was a possibility when they were in bed, quiet, to take a couple of minutes to do that, and then to come to class and have a outline, an impromptu speech sort of developed so that we could perform and then critique and learn how to self-evaluate better. But then in some of the courses, some of the people, like Grif was saying, depending on their access to the internet, to computers, depending on their life and their work, they weren't able to do that, and that was okay. We just met people where they were at.
Yeah. So now, onto the successes. Because I know that a little bird told me that someone gave Erica cake, which sounds like a pretty big success to me in this particular context. But not just confectionery based. I'm interested in finding out what moments for the two of you as facilitators, and starting with you, Erica, really felt like, was there a moment where you looked at what was happening and thought, yes, this is working?
Well, obviously when you get a cake, everything's working. But I also got a chocolate, I have to say. Not because of the chocolate, but the reason why I got a chocolate is because one of the girls that was actually, she was unemployed when she came to the group. She was one of the people who were most strongly felt about how lectures how this should be like lecture, this should be a whiteboard thing. And then at the, I would say week 4 somewhere, I got a chocolate from her. Because she was thanking me because she actually got a job on the back of this course. And of course that's not going to happen to everybody, but that was something that really moved me as a person. And because when you do something for a very long time and you get that quick results, which is usually with learning, you don't get really quick results. That was really a super reward for me. And that girl is still participating in the course, which is also a very good thing that I find it, and I write it to the success board because now she has a job, and people are very busy all the time, and especially with programming is that you have to really work outside of the learning circle as well. So outside of the 4 hours that we are together, in order to actually get somewhere. And she's still doing that, so she's really making a lot of effort. And even for everybody else, I think the fact when I saw people coming together and just talking, when I wasn't actually, my presence wasn't needed apart from, hey girls, do you want some water or tea or I don't know, something. That was that success moment for me, that I said, okay, whatever I invested in this project actually paid out. So yeah, the chocolate and the water and the tea, all
and
of
the
that
goosebumps.
stuff.
The stories like that give me goosebumps. I think it's amazing.
The goosebumps are the cherry on the top. Yes.
The goosebumps are the cherry on the top. How about you, Emily? What was your
successes for me was just having people show up on time with a smile on their face. Often, if they had material done and ready, and they motivated their peers by telling them, this is a no judgment zone, and we're just going to share because this is how we're going to grow and learn. And also when they would check up on their peers, if someone didn't show up, they would email them. That was a success. I feel as though people just being present, in some way, they are filtering the information. So that was a success for me. I wish I got a chocolate, though. But,
We'll have to see what we can do about that. So the next question then is really directed at you, Grif, about next steps. what we've heard so far has been inspiring and exciting, but what's next?
We're going to send Emily some chocolates in the mail, and then after that, I think we'll be out at the with the Knight Foundation at the American Library Association conference in San Francisco the week after next, and we're really looking forward to sharing some of these the same takeaways that we've been talking about here, and kind of distilling this pilot round that's wrapping up this next week, into something that the people can engage with and critique and kind of riff on and take in their own ways. And then in the fall, starting probably the first week in September, we will be kind of launching the second round of this course in Chicago. And the goal, which I think is definitely achievable right now, is to expand from 2 branches to up to 10, and go from 4 learning circles to up to 20 or so, 2 per branch or so. There's been a lot of interest. Emily's been a great advocate in Chicago and I think she's going to continue to be a great resource to helping other cyber navigators feel comfortable as they start running learning circles in their own branches. So between now and then, we're going to be going back and kind of working through a lot of the facilitation guides and kind of help making the website and some of the online materials that we've developed more engaging, so that we can hopefully make the job of the facilitator and the host and the participants easier. Kind of beyond that, I mean, I think what we're hoping for is to kind of build a model that allows any sort of physical infrastructure, be it a library or a museum or a prison or an embassy, to essentially kind of tap into this and say we want to take we already have access to these online learning materials, but we want to access them in a way that can really kind of create an empowering learning experience for our residents or our visitors, and so I think that's what we're working towards. Yeah, and it's a really, really exciting thing to be a part of.
Absolutely. So if anyone out there on the internet is interested in finding out more about these, we will direct them to www.p2pu.org, correct?
Sounds good to me.
That's right. Come to our website, www.p2pu.org. From there, you will be able to follow various links to the resources that we have for people who are either interested in taking a course in their community or running a course in their community. And keep an eye on Twitter and Facebook, because we keep sending updates that way too. At 2 minutes past the hour, thank you, everybody, for your insights and your thoughts. With any luck, we will have one of these sooner rather than later again. Have wonderful weekends. And go to your library and borrow a book. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Becca.
Thanks, Becca.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.